All right, you guys, make way. All right. Thank you, Sheriff. Good luck the rest of the evening.
Appreciate it.
You bet. That's it. Was it all you hoped it would be?
Can you tell us what it says?
I did get a good look. So, you all need to leave? I mean that politely and nicely. You've had a long day, but these folks can't go until you all go. I know we had talked about leaving the equipment here. Don't leave the equipment here because you're not going to want to be here tomorrow. I mean, you're welcome to be here if you don't have a Rule 22 for what's going on tomorrow. It's just good old trial stuff. So you find anything good? You had a lot of time. I guess that's to be a group decision. Do you mind taking, they can come collect them, you just want to put them down. Those.
Whoever has audio, don't get your audio over here.
You've just seen the courtroom of Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney. We have been waiting for a possible indictment to get passed to this judge. He did not read anything from the bench, as you saw. He signed off the paperwork and put it in the clerk of the court's hands. And we are all waiting to get the contents of just what that is. The grand jury has been sitting for hours now, hearing testimony, and we are all watching to see just what this effort yields. We are allowed, as you can see, to have some cameras and insight into the courthouse because this is Fulton County. This is not a federal courthouse. And so we're having this rather unique look of this walk down the hall. Here's what we know so far. The judge, McBurney, has handed the indictment that he received to the Fulton County court clerk. And the clerk is being escorted by this large group of law enforcement, and you can see also cameras tracking the movement of that document, not just the person who's carrying it, but that document itself as well. We are expecting the document to be unsealed momentarily. This is live coverage from the Washington Post, and we will be with you this evening as we find out just what the contents provide. We're doing live updates on our website. We have reporters who are in Fulton County and reporters who are here in Washington, D.C., ready to digest just what we learn. I'm Libby Casey. I'm with Rhonda Colvin. We'll be here this evening, so stay tuned as we learn more. Rhonda, let's talk about how significant Fulton County is and just why we're all watching this so closely.
Yeah, this is a significant case because it's been going on for so long. It's one of the longest probes right now into Donald Trump, the former president, as well as his allies' efforts to possibly intervene or overturn the results of the 2020 election. We know through the January 6th congressional panel, we know through our own reporting that, there were a few states, some of those closely watched states back in November of 2020 that experienced somewhat of a pressure campaign. But Georgia seemed to be a really significant case where we had audio the first week in January. And I know many people might be familiar with that call that Trump made to the Secretary of State, Raffensberger, asking him to find 11,780 votes. And that is something that Raffensberger, as well as other Republican leaders, have said, our election stands. It went to Joe Biden. But over the last few years, more details have emerged that not only did that call happen, but there were other efforts, potentially by some of the lawyers who worked with Trump and tried to tell him that there could be schemes to overturn the election. We're learning details as this investigation went on, and we'll probably learn some perhaps tonight, perhaps tomorrow. But this has been a case that's been going on for a very long time. Actually, a few weeks after that call was made was when Fani Willis, the DA in Fulton County, started a probe and announced to those who had received phone calls or had documentation of any sort of attempts to overturn the election to hold on to those documents, and that she would be looking into that. From there, she got a special grand jury who spent several months looking at the details that they had. They had interviews with really a revolving door of people, people from Washington, people who were sort of in Trump's orbit around the time of January 6th, and they've all testified to that special grand jury. Now we're awaiting the results of this grand jury that was just recently sat in July to see if they are going to vote to indict. So, we saw that the judge, McBurney, was a part of the process right there with the other staffers of the court. And we're just waiting for those details to see what happened, what this grand jury determined.
You're looking at images there of Fani Willis. Now, she was elected in 2020 to serve as the top prosecutor in Fulton County. And of course, that includes Georgia's most populous, the capital of Atlanta. That's the most populous county. And Rhonda, as people may remember, when she took office in early 2021, she soon sent a letter to top state officials announcing that she would investigate efforts to interfere with the 2020 presidential election. Now, she didn't name Trump personally, but that announcement came in the wake of news of Trump's recorded phone call that you were just referencing, that call with the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensberger, in which Trump told him to find more votes. So let's talk about the role of Fani Willis here and how she's been under the microscope and really under pressure by Donald Trump himself as she moves along with this investigation.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is that this case started when she was just getting settled into this new job as DA. She ran in the 2020 election for this seat. She actually ran against her former boss. She won it, and then when the information about the call that was made to Raffensberger by Trump, that kind of was on her radar. And she said within weeks, I believe it was in February, so that was about a month after that call, she said, we're going to look into this. My office is going to look into this. She requested of other judges that she could get a special grand jury. That was a grand jury that could not vote. They were just sort of the information gatherers. So they were in session for about 7 months and heard many people that folks are probably familiar with. They heard from Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham. He actually tried to fight appearing in front of this grand jury. He took it all the way to the Supreme Court, but he was not successful in that, and he had to testify in front of this grand jury. Brian Kemp, who is the governor of Georgia, he had to also testify about what he knew. There was really just this long concert of folks who had information about those efforts to possibly intervene in Georgia's election that came in front of that special grand jury. When they dissolved, it went to back to the DA's office, and then a separate grand jury. They were sat, and that's what we're waiting on, the results of if they feel that that first grand jury had enough information and enough evidence to say that there was a probable cause to bring up an indictment. So we're still waiting for details, but this has been going on for a very long time. And as I said, it's really been much of a centerpiece of Fani Willis's work as DA in her first time as DA.
Let's talk about security around the courthouse, Rhonda, and the efforts that have been made and the heads up that Willis had given weeks ago, really, to say August will be a time that we need to have people on alert. Some people should come to work. Some people shouldn't come to work. Be prepared, essentially.
Yeah, you know, Fani Willis put out memos and to the court staff, other judges, saying we want this area cleared in the early part of August. So we always knew that perhaps something would come out of this first part of August. She asked that judges not schedule any work, that they allow staffers to be able to work remotely during these weeks, because there has been a very big concern about security in this area of Atlanta. And there is also another high-profile case actually happening at the Fulton County Courthouse this week as well. It's been going on. It is a RICO case involving a rapper who the DA's office has said created a criminal enterprise of a gang, and that has also turned out a lot of security. The people in Fulton County have said, the staff rather in Fulton County at the courthouse has said that, you know, they have had the benefit of watching these other indictments and other arraignments play out in New York City. In Washington, D.C. just a couple weeks ago. They've sent security officials to these locations, to Miami, South Florida as well, to try to figure out what security should look like when you are bringing a former president in for a court appearance. So they have had the benefit of going forth, I guess you could say, but they really have been trying to figure out how do they secure their city. One thing that I've been reading from local reporting is that Georgia has looser gun laws than the other states and localities that have had Trump court appearances. So that has also been a concern. I know also it's been reported that the Georgia legislature has been asked to lock down the Capitol, secure it for tomorrow. So there has been this ongoing concern there in Georgia about security and what an indictment might bring.
Rhonda, I want to go back in time as we wait for the content of this indictment, which we should have soon, which we will share with our audience as soon as we do. I want to go back in time, though, and go back to this conversation that Trump had with Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensberger. And this is that call, which Trump has repeatedly called since then a perfect phone call, in which he instructed the Secretary of State to find enough votes in Trump's favor for him to win Georgia. Let's listen.
You should want to have an accurate election, and you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have, not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes. You know what they did, and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk. But they are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, and they are removing machinery, and they're moving it as fast as they can, both of which are criminal fines, and you can't let it happen, and you are letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
That's a phone call between then President Donald Trump and Georgia's Secretary of State. It's at the heart of these questions about efforts to overturn the election results in Georgia. Rhonda, just contextualize for us, why is Georgia so important, and why was it so important in the 2020 presidential election?
Yeah, well, Georgia is interesting for a few different reasons. One, it was one of those states where, at one time, being a southern state, it had some reliability of going red. But in recent elections, it's shown that it is a state that is very competitive. And that has made for a lot of contentious elections. I know we've covered some of the recounts as well as the runoff races. And so Georgia has sort of been this closely watched state for election activity in the last few years. one reason that Republicans and allies of Trump really focused on Georgia is it was a state that was led by Republicans. There was a Republican governor. The state house was Republican. So when we read about some of the reporting that has come out on some of the individuals who have testified to this grand jury, that they're aware of this pressure campaign, it's thought that perhaps they thought they'd have a friendly audience in Georgia because the state was run by Republicans. But as we've seen, as we've reported, that a lot of these Republicans said no to Donald Trump and allies who were calling and pressuring them to either put forward a fake electors scheme where they would have an alternate group of electors for Trump instead of those who would have voted accurately for President Biden. So Georgia, it is interesting for multiple reasons, but it is become one of those states, especially when we have found out the pressure campaigns that happen in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. There just seemed to be a lot of special energy located in Georgia, perhaps because it was a Republican-led state at the time.
Rhonda, let's scope out here and talk about just this unprecedented 5 months of, less than 5 months even, of indictments against the former president, Donald Trump, because certainly we are all watching to see how this probe touches him as well as perhaps other people who are accused in this election probe. We're waiting to see the contents of this indictment yet. We don't yet have it. But let's go back and talk about the 3 indictments we do know of that range from federal to New York that we've gotten sort of used to in a way, Rhonda, but it really is just history-shattering to look back on this past year. Talk us through what we know about those.
History-shattering is a great way to describe it because it has been in short order. They've been coming since the springtime, and we even had one just here in D.C. in a federal court just a couple weeks ago. The first one, of course, was the one brought by Alvin Bragg in New York City. That stems back to charges of falsifying business records, where Trump is alleged to have paid off Stormy Daniels, the adult entertainer, during the time he was running for president the first time in 2016. That case was brought forward, or that indictment was brought forward back in the springtime. Then, of course, after that, we had the classified documents indictment. That is a federal case. That was the first federal indictment of a sitting president and of Donald Trump. And that's located out of federal court in southern Florida, where he is charged with keeping classified documents that he was supposed to turn back over after being president. Instead, had them stored in Mar-a-Lago. And we also know that his longtime aide, Walt Nauta, has also been charged in that case as well. We have most recently the federal probe brought by Jack Smith, the special counsel from the DOJ, who has looked into Trump's efforts in overturning the election and also January 6th. So that is something that we're actually still reporting on because that's an active case. There was just a hearing a few days ago in that federal court to find out how much information could Trump have, and the prosecutors wanted to keep him from that so that he did not put that out on social media or share it with other individuals. So that is a case that has started off. He has been arraigned in that, and that's in its first few weeks as well. And then now we have this potentially. Of course, we don't know what we have right now, but we do know that this is the culmination of the work of a grand jury in Fulton County.
Rhonda, against this backdrop of this intensive work that the grand jury has been doing and that DA Fani Willis has been doing, is the political calendar and the presidential contest for 2024, which feels very far away to people who are not running for president. But Iowa State Fair is happening right now, and we saw Republican candidates do their thing at the Iowa State Fair over the last handful of days. Can you talk to us about the contrast of these investigations and in some cases indictments against this this parallel track that's happening of the presidential election?
Yeah, it's been so interesting to watch and report on. It appears that the Trump team is also using these court appearances for their gain in that the election season. They were also in Iowa this weekend, the former president. You also have next week is going to be the first presidential debate on Fox among the candidates in the Republican Party. You can imagine that questions about Fulton County or questions about any of these other court matters may be brought up even if Trump is not there. So these court appearances as well as the indictments, they have been interwoven in the 2024 election. We know the former president has been able to fundraise off of the indictments. At the beginning, it seemed as if he was gaining a lot of steam with the supporters who were giving to his campaigns. He was also being able to use some of that PAC money for his legal defense as well as others who are implicated in some of these cases. So he's been able to fundraise off of this. If you look at his website, I did a few days ago, he's calling out to supporters saying it's not me they're going after, it's you they're going after, and I'm just in the way. So you see some of his wording is getting fairly aggressive, trying to bring supporters to rally around him at this time and hoping that that might be beneficial for him in this campaign season. But you're right, you really can't, right now at least, extract the Trump indictments, the Trump arraignments from Trump running for president again, as well as some of these other campaigns who also have been asked about where they stand.
You know, Rhonda, Trump is now running an ad attacking 4 prosecutors, including Fani Willis, and he's writing on Truth Social things to discredit her. He's trying to attack her personally. You know, what concerns does that raise both for her safety as well as for what might the judge have concerns about when it comes to, you know, interfering with this process? I mean, talk to us about how Trump has been told to pump the brakes in some other areas, you know, regarding how he attacks people.
Yeah, you'll remember back when we covered the New York indictment in New York City that the judge warned and told lawyers, you know, keep your client in check. We all are very familiar of how much Donald Trump likes social media and to get his supporters going. And, you know, many people across the world believe that his ability to do that led to January 6th. So everyone's familiar with sort of the dangers of using words to get supporters out there. That is something that Fulton County has been looking at. Their law enforcement has been open about the fact that they want to make sure that they're fortifying that area to make sure that passionate supporters of Donald Trump or others aren't, you know, mixing it up out there. Fani Willis in the last few weeks has sent memos to local leaders showing some of the communications she and her staff have received throughout this process. Some of it she has discussed is racially toned. She is a woman of color, the first woman of color to bring charges like this to the former president. We know he has made comments about women going far back as, you know, back in 2015 when he was running as a primary candidate. So this is something that people who have watched the former president, you know, heard what he has had to say before, are familiar and you know, a little scared that he could say some things that make things get out of hand.
Rhonda, what are you watching as we wait to see the contents of this indictment in Fulton County?
Well, one big thing, I'm looking to see if there's going to be other people listed in this indictment. This grand jury has had a revolving door of witnesses come in front of it throughout the past year, throughout also the investigation, the congressional investigation done by the January 6th panel. Some of those folks testified in front of this grand jury. Cassidy Hutchinson was one. So they've really had a lot of information to digest. So I'm wondering how that plays out in an indictment document. Are there going to be new details that we just did not know? It seems like with this case, with January 6th and also the run up to January 6th, we're always learning something new. So I'll be looking out for that. And then any of the other people that we know were close to Donald Trump at that time. I'm thinking of Rudy Giuliani. I'm thinking of Mark Meadows or Sidney Powell, John Eastman, some of these folks who were sort of in Trump's ear at the time, telling him that there are ways that the election results could be overturned. Are they going to be named as well or indicted? So those are things that I'm looking out for. But of course, just new information, because there are things, of course, a grand jury has to keep things secret. There are things that we just may not know at this point that might be major news tomorrow.
Rhonda, let's watch what we know so far. This is the handoff of the documents earlier today. Let's watch.
you take the certification, or does it go with Madam Clerk? All right. Thank you all. Yes, you too. All right, you guys, make way.
This is the clerk of the court taking this indictment from the courtroom of Fulton Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney. He essentially looked at that, Rhonda, processed it, moved it forward to the clerk. That's who has it now, and we are waiting for the rest of us to get access. You can see all that security there, and we can also see the camera, somebody with an iPhone taking some pictures. I mean, they're figuring out how media access will be dealt with in this case will be fascinating because there is more access than there would be in a federal courthouse, Rhonda.
No, that's so true. We've not been able to see, you know, the lead up and some of these behind the scenes moves in some of the other cases. So this is going to be one of those parts of this that is unique from the other cases. We do know that the Fulton County Courthouse does allow cameras. So we will see if this case, and if there is a case, if things move forward and we're able to see that in real time. That's going to be very interesting, historical, of course, and it also kind of raises, you know, questions and thoughts about transparency in this process. If you think back to New York, we, you know, got some artist renderings of what Trump looked like. We were able to get a photograph, but we weren't able to see the proceedings as they happened. Of course, with the federal court here in D.C., we weren't able to see much at all. In fact, Trump was brought in through a secret doorway underground and was, you know, there was no seeing him or what he looked like inside. We had to rely on our great reporters' notes who were feeding us information. But this is going to be unique. If we're going to be able to see the process play out from this point of walking the documents into the clerk and to the judge, and then also seeing Donald Trump, if this does get to the point where we see him arraigned.
Rhonda, you covered just a couple of weeks ago that case in Washington, D.C. that centered around attempts to really overturn the election on January 6th, and also, you know, that lead up to it and the process that was taking place. A lot of that was revealed to the public through the January 6th Select Committee hearings in Congress. Can you talk to us about how that committee's work has had a ripple effect in terms of not just that, but also the investigation in Georgia?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately because I covered that committee from start to finish. I remember going to some of the meetings before they did the televised late night meetings, primetime meetings. I went there and sat and observed as a reporter. And, you know, there was a lot of talk of, will this panel work out? Will this committee do anything? They have no prosecutorial powers as an arm of Congress. They can just kind of information gather. They had a team of lawyers, of course, who were able to interview and collect depositions. But where does this work go? That was really the big question at the beginning of the January 6th investigation on the Hill. But now we see that they were able to turn over their report, their findings, their recommendations, the witnesses they brought to light. They were able to turn that over to that federal probe led by Jack Smith that culminated into that arraignment that we saw 2 weeks ago. And they were also able to share information with Fulton County as well. One thing that's been interesting to watch with Fulton County is some of the witnesses that they interviewed, you have to wonder, would they have even known that these folks existed or had some sort of role in understanding what Trump's mindset was in the days leading up to January 6th. Folks like Cassidy Hutchinson, who was in front of the Fulton County grand jury. You just wonder if they would have had all of that information had their investigation not been playing out at the exact same time we were all covering and watching those January 6th hearings. So, you know, back to what I was saying earlier, it's something really as a reporter I've been dwelling on a lot is I watched how Congress in the aftermath of January 6th tried to figure out a way to do something about it. and now seeing cases actually develop where a former president is being brought in front of a court on charges that do stem to the research and work done by that congressional panel.
You know, Rhonda, people are still wondering what happens as the election marches on and these cases march on in parallel. What happens if Donald Trump wins? And so let's talk about his potential power as a future president, not just as a past president, but a future president, to wield power over the work being done by Jack Smith, the cases that are moving forward in the shape of indictments in Florida as well as Washington, D.C., and how that is different than what's happening in Georgia.
Yeah, that again is an interesting, civic studies case right now to see how these all play out, what Trump could do as a person who is undergoing multiple court appearances and also running a campaign for president. We are in very unprecedented times with this. The Constitution doesn't say much about the qualifications of a president. There is nothing in there about you can't be convicted. He checks all the boxes that are in the Constitution, his age, his residency, that allow him to run for president. The interesting thing that has been asked a lot is, could he run from prison perhaps? Could he run or be president after he is convicted of something? What would that look like? I mean, these questions are kind of far out. We still don't know where these cases might go in the end. But one thing that is unique about Georgia is in talks with, Republicans, or you hear from Trump, he says he'll need to be pardoned. And even if he isn't elected, whoever is elected needs to promise to pardon him. With this case, he can't be pardoned because this is being brought at the state level. And in Georgia, you cannot be pardoned also until you have fulfilled your sentence, and then years have also elapsed. So this is one that even if it got to trial, got to a conviction, could he pardon himself from this one? It does not look legally possible right now, which is why this case is something certainly to watch and will be a really, really long road for Trump.
Let's talk, Rhonda, about some of the important people who were maybe known in the state of Georgia, but ultimately became household names to people who focus on politics in America through the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. We can start with Brad Raffensberger, who we heard the voice of earlier this evening in some archival tape. Let's talk about who he is and what role he's played.
Yeah, he's the Secretary of State of Georgia, and he's a Republican. So that was something also that, many people pointed out, that these leaders who were being pressured by Trump were from his own party. Raffensberger stood his ground and stood by the results of the Georgia election in 2020. The Georgia election went through a lot of work. It was audited, it was counted thoroughly, the process was transparent, and he kept saying that even though he was being pressured by members of his own party nationally and those who surrounded Trump to do something about finding more votes. He testified in front of that congressional panel I was just talking about, the January 6th committee, and told his story. He talked about how after Trump went after him, after other close allies of Trump went after him, he and his family experienced a lot of threats. That was something we also heard from election workers as well, that this pressure campaign then turned into making these folks targets. But Brad Raffensberger ran again for his seat. He did win that seat again, despite Trump's effort at trying to unseat him. And he's one that you have to wonder, had he not stood his ground and said, we stand by the results of Georgia, what might have happened? He seemed to be sort of, that wall that just could not be penetrated.
Rhonda, I want to talk about someone else, Gabriel Sterling. Let's watch a clip of him. He was a top voting official in Georgia when he spoke out in December of 2020 in the aftermath of the election, begging Trump and his supporters to stop spreading false claims of election fraud. Let's watch.
It has to stop. Mr. President, you have not condemned these actions or this language. Senators, you have not condemned this language or these actions. This has to stop. We need you to step up, and if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some.
That is Gabriel Sterling, a Republican and top Georgia elections official. Rhonda, his relevance in this probe.
Well, again, he was one of those election officials who, and I remember covering this with you as well when we were covering the election week in November of 2020. He would come out and brief everyone about what was going on, show that it was a very transparent process. But his words right there and his words warning Trump and allies and others who were trying to pressure them to change votes or do something else other than what was reality, you know, they're haunting. When you see, he was saying that about a month before January 6th, the siege on the Capitol, where people died. I mean, he tried to warn people. So he knew what the election workers were going through. He was trying to tell others and, you know, tell the country that people were being pressured down there. People's homes were being visited by Trump allies or people who thought that they could change the results or pressure them to do otherwise. So he, again, has emerged as someone who stood his ground, said that Georgia had the results they had, and that Trump and others needed to just live with it.
Rhonda, stay with me. I want to bring in congressional investigations reporter Jacqueline Alemany. Among the many things she's covered, it includes the Trump White House. It also includes the January 6th committee. Jackie, let's talk about what we're waiting for now. This potential indictment. We know an indictment has been handed over to the clerk. Why is Fulton County someplace we are all so closely watching?
Yeah, Libby, I think that this is something that we're so closely watching for a number of reasons. But this is an investigation that is, you know, covering a lot of ground that we've already seen, but is actually even broader and more sprawling than the outcomes of some of the other investigations that have happened so far, such as Jack Smith's investigation into the efforts to overturn the election and the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. But in this investigation, we know that Fani Willis has pursued a much broader purview, targeting and incorporating evidence and testimony pertaining to a lot of the allies who are working with Trump in Georgia specifically, and even some people now outside of Georgia, as is allowed under the Georgia RICO laws, who are potentially going to be facing criminal charges this evening. That ranges from a lot of the unindicted co-conspirators that we saw mentioned in Jack Smith's indictment that was released last week or the week before. It's hard to keep track of this summer with now this being the fourth indictment that is being released against Trump. So people like Rudy Giuliani, Trump's former personal lawyer, longtime associate, Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Ken Cheesebro, and then, a litany of other players who were all working to overturn the results in Georgia specifically, and trying to find this case of this evidence of the Trump campaign doing everything possible to find election fraud that did not exist. There's also some new evidence that I think we are anticipating this evening, which will be a fairly remarkable feat for all of the work that's been done around this topic, for people to now be seeing something new that's been potentially uncovered by prosecutors. Which is evidence relating to Coffee County. That is the county where Trump officials did have access to voting machines, and there was data that was actually copied from those machines in Coffee County, which our colleagues who have done some outstanding reporting on this, actually dating as far back as to last year, has been a point of interest, a major point of interest for Fani Willis's team.
It's just incredible, Jackie, to see and track back that reporting, and then how relevant some of those unearthed stories and nuggets have become as we've watched these legal cases unfold, and as we watch to learn more later tonight. I want to take you back to your reporting on the January 6th committee and how the work they did
either laid the groundwork or was working in parallel with the efforts of federal investigations as well as what was happening here in Georgia. How do the committee members reflect on their work now as they watch some of this other activity take place?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because actually at the time I remember a lot of the sources that I was speaking to, people who were sort of working with January 6 investigators and people who were directly involved with the committee, all felt like the Georgia charges would be the most consequential. And at the time, that was largely because there was no special counsel yet that had been appointed by the Justice Department, and the Justice Department was really dragging their feet on pursuing a federal investigation. And so there was this thought that Fani Willis was really the only one who was taking this seriously and looking into it, and they had been meticulously working all along the way as the January 6th committee really got going. And a lot of the people who actually we saw during the January 6th hearings last summer are people who have been key to providing evidence and information to Fani Willis. People like Ruby Freeman, Gabe Sterling. These are all characters who are now, as you said, household names to people who follow politics in America. They, testified under oath before Congress, were in the limelight under intense scrutiny, and spoke firsthand about what had happened to them throughout all this entire process. The Freemans speaking about how Rudy Giuliani put a target on their back after he posted on social media about them, and basically the way that all of these Trump allies turned the system upside down and created an atmosphere that really discouraged the electoral process and democratic process in general.
Jackie, I want to play some of the tape from the January 6th committee hearings relating to those two women you were just telling us about. And to remind people, it really went to the top. It went all the way to Donald Trump, falsely claiming that these two election workers in Georgia, an elderly mother and her daughter, helped rig the election results in the state. And we heard Shaye Moss testify in person at the committee last year. So let's listen to Trump's false claims and then Shaye Moss's testimony.
We had at least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly, 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler.
Donald Trump attacked you and your mother using her name 18 times on that call. 18 times. Ms. Moss, can you describe what you experienced listening to former President Trump attack you and your mother in a call with the Georgia Secretary of State?
I felt horrible. I felt like it was all my fault. Like, if I would have never decided to be an elections worker, like, I could have done anything else, but that's what I decided to do. And now people are lying and spreading rumors and lies and attacking my mom.
That's Shaye Moss testifying before the January 6th Select Committee. Jackie Alemany, how does what happened on January 6th connect in ways to what happened in Georgia? I mean, the committee was really looking at this all-encompassing sweep of what took place in the weeks leading up to January 6th, that day, as well as the aftermath. How does Georgia factor into the bigger picture of what they were looking at?
Yeah, I would say Georgia was really sort of the laboratory of a lot of the experiments that Trump and his allies were trying to implement, and a lot of these fringy, unsubstantiated claims and plans to overturn the election results. And it was one of the states where they were actually successful in trying to execute some of those ideas, from the slate of fake electors, which they were successfully able to submit, to actually breaching voting machines, which was something that, according to our reporting, was something that happened and something that we're expecting to see be a part of this indictment, as prosecutors have obtained evidence about communications between Trump officials and Coffee County voting officials. Even Mark Meadows, he was someone who actually, we've reported recently, went down to Georgia to search for this election fraud that Trump claimed existed, and eventually, jokingly remarked to White House counsel Eric Hirschman that even his son was unable to find the fraud that Trump had been claiming existed. So Georgia was sort of ground zero for a lot of the work that was being done, and that continued really leading up to January 6th.
Let's bring Rhonda back into the conversation. Rhonda, I love how Jackie put that it was sort of this laboratory Georgia was to test out some of these ideas and theories and methods, to push at some of the levers of power, and vote counting and voting machines and things like that. How do you see Georgia fitting in to the broader efforts to find ways to get Donald Trump to stay in the White House and retain power in January of 2021?
Yeah, what unfolded in Georgia, or what we have reported on and what witnesses have said, could be a template that perhaps happened in some of these other states. Like Arizona, we know Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, these were all the sites for the fake electors scheme, where a group of Trump electors would have turned in their results for Congress to count and certify the election for those states for Trump when he did not win those states. So it's interesting that we have so much information. We have recordings, we have documentation, text messages that are centered on Georgia, but they perhaps tell a story that we may not ever know or don't know that also happen in some of these other states, whether they happen in a bigger way or a smaller way. But it's interesting to see how much was going on at that time between December and January 6th, and how much the efforts that were spent to potentially try to overturn the election. We know that one of the folks who was waiting for an interview today in front of this grand jury, one of the last people they had called, was a independent journalist who stumbled across a meeting where later it was found out that that was a group trying to figure out a scheme to overturn the election in Georgia. And that kind of shows you the breadth of this investigation brought by DA Willis, that it's trying to look at every nook and cranny and paint a picture of an enterprise, not just Trump, but an enterprise trying to help overturn the election results there in that state.
Jackie, let's talk more about Coffee County and the reporting the Washington Post has done and its significance in terms of the efforts to really push and see just how much could be changed, or in the process of examining or looking at or investigating, there could be changes actually done to votes.
Yeah, well, Emma Brown and John Swain had a remarkable deep dive into how Coffee County became the target in the multi-state search for this alleged evidence of voter fraud after the 2020 election that Trump was claiming. And they were able to find in at least 2 instances courts or state lawmakers that granted Trump supporters and allies access to voting machines in Coffee County, which are considered usually critical infrastructure, vital to our national security. And these machines that are closely guarded in these counties, in Coffee County, and Emma and John reported at the time that at least 7 other counties, local officials did give outsiders access to their data, and that data was actually copied from those machines and misrepresented into some of the, crackpot calculations that these outside advisors were doing for Trump. People like Phil Waldron, some of these people were former, members of the military, and they were all number crunching in the Willard war room in Washington, D.C., getting as many different numbers in from Secretary of State's offices, and in this case, from directly from voting machines, which obviously these numbers were not accurate in any way, and did really warp a lot of the analyses that these people were doing. But again, I think this is an action that I think is extremely tangible, especially when it comes to the law. I think a lot of these other ideas that we talk about sometimes seem more conceptual to voters, but this is something that I think we can expect to see Fani Willis actually land charges on, just because of the gravity of these breaches and how much it really undermines voters' trust in our entire system.
Rhonda, let's talk about the various charges that Donald Trump does face in the form of indictments that we already know of, and how some of these court proceedings are really going to be marching on throughout the election season. Let's go back in time a little bit and talk about just what charges he faces and how they really differ from each other, because he is being looked at on a range of charges, some of which have connections and some of which have no connections at all, frankly.
Yeah, range is a great word, because all of these indictments are not equal to each other. They are coming from different directions. They are coming for different things. So you look at New York, for example, that's something that goes all the way back to Trump running in that first election in 2016 and being charged with paying off Stormy Daniels, the adult entertainer, with hush money payments or falsifying business records. There are over 30 counts in that indictment that he faces in New York. And we also have in Miami the classified documents case. That is where the federal government says that Trump took documents that should have been returned back to the National Archives, and instead he had them stored in, everywhere from the bathroom. We've seen the photos, the bathrooms, the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago illegally, that he had them stored there. Also implicated in that is Walt Nada, a longtime assistant. So that case is still moving forward in southern Florida. You also have, of course, the one we are waiting more information right now, Fulton County, Georgia, and that's election interference. That is the question of, did Trump and or allies try to intervene in Georgia's election results for President Biden? And I think I've wrapped up all of them so far, but there are other cases as well that we are awaiting movement on. E. Jean Carroll, the journalist who said that Trump sexually abused her in a department store dressing room. There is going to be a civil case brought in January 15th on that, even though she did win a case earlier this year where a jury did find that he sexually abused her. She now can bring a lawsuit about some of the comments he has made about her. So that starts in January. There's also another ongoing suit against the Trump Organization. That, of course, is the former president's business that he had before the presidency, but that also is the subject of some legal probes in New York. So there's a lot going on. When you look at the calendar, it feels like every month now is stacking up with a Trump court appearance or a trial moving forward. And you just wonder how can he or his campaign even separate his campaign and these court appearances. And it doesn't look like they will be trying to separate them, but it is going to be, simply put, a very busy year for Trump as well as his campaign.
Let's look at how busy that calendar is going to be. Rhonda, take us through the timeline here of how the 2024 election season is lining up with these trials.
Yeah, this is one thing that stood out to me, and I just mentioned this. You have on January 15th, the trial with E. Jean Carroll. That suit begins. That's the same day as the Iowa GOP caucus. Typically, that week is when candidates trying to get the nomination would be in and out of Iowa. You have to wonder, is he going to have planned trips there? How is he going to balance that with a suit beginning that same day of that caucus. Then you go into March and through the early spring, where we're going to have major and key dates in the election, where we're going to start funneling down what candidate is going to be potentially the nominee on the Republican ticket. And then you see March 24th is when that trial brought by Alvin Bragg, the New York DA, that begins. That's the hush money payments trial. And then, you move on to May, and you've got the classified documents case. That trial begins. And most of these trials, it is expected that the defendant is going to have to be there in person. Again, we're in unprecedented times. Who knows if he will be there in person or how this is all going to even work. But these are things that he is going to have to be present in some fashion. So we then move on to the RNC, where they will be giving the nomination to whomever wins those primary contests. And then, of course, on Election Day. So it's jam-packed, really. And a lot of this election looks like it is going to be about the Trump cases. And that also brings in these other candidates. You have had all of the candidates be asked questions since the springtime of where do they stand on these indictments, what do they think about them. Most of the candidates have not yet said anything too much against Trump. They're mainly saying kind of this drumbeat of we don't want the justice system to be politicized. But you wonder, will that be kept up as we keep going? Because as I mentioned, next week is the very first debate where some of these Republican candidates will be on the stage for the first time. You can bet that some of these moderators are ready with questions to get them on the record about the Trump indictment. So we'll see where this goes. But it is likely to affect not only Trump's campaign, but the other candidates as well.
Rhonda, as we wait here to find out the content of this indictment and just who it really ensnares and puts on the line, Trump is lashing out, sending out a press release, attacking Fani Willis, attacking other prosecutors who have brought indictments successfully through grand juries against him at this point, and also claiming politics. How is Donald Trump fundraising off this and using this as a way to get attention and support?
Yeah, well, we've seen from filings, the financial disclosure filings through the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, that Trump did well after the first indictment back in New York, that people, his supporters or others, felt like this was politicization of or weaponization, as some Republicans have been terming it, of the justice system, and that this was unfair to bring to a presidential candidate. He's been able to talk about it at rallies and try to drum up support. So you have seen donors respond to that favorably for him. What I think has been interesting in the last few weeks, and something that we talked about when we were covering this last indictment with the Jack Smith probe for January 6th, it seems as if supporters were slightly quieter. That was also around the same time that we learned that one of his PACs is also financing his defense as well as others' defense in some of these cases. So you wonder, is that eventually not going to sit well with donors, and whether it's large donors or those who are giving at the grassroots level? It is legal for a PAC to pay for the things that Trump is paying for it with his legal defense. But even if it's legal, you wonder if it's going to start concerning those who are giving money to him for the purpose of him running for president. So as we continue to see these filing dates where candidates have to disclose how much money they're earning, we're going to be able to get a better picture, I think, of how much his supporters are responding, whether at the small level or at the larger level with money.
Rhonda, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Let's update our viewers and readers as to where things are at. We are awaiting the contents of this indictment. Earlier this evening, Fulton Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney signed off on the indictment as it was carried into him. He gave it to the clerk of the court. It is now in the clerk's hands, and we are waiting to see the content of that. We know that this all wraps around the 2020 election and questions about just what wrongdoing is alleged to have been committed. Donald Trump is at the center of this probe. Other people are as well. But as far as the details, we are all waiting to see what the grand jury put forth and signed off on
tonight. We are also watching to see if the DA, Fani Willis, speaks, because she may want to get out in front of this and have her say as this process moves forward. All of this will unfold. We have reporters who are in Georgia waiting to get the documents. We have reporters here in our Washington Post newsroom also watching, and we'll be continuing to break news on this all night long. So do stay with the Washington Post on print as well as here on our live shows and everywhere else. I'm Libby Casey. A special thanks to Rhonda Colvin for this late night, and we'll see you again soon.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.